Welcome to Spotlight Revenue Operations. I'm Arshad Karim, principal with the Alexander Group, and I'm very pleased to be talking today to Mac McKenzie from Pacific Biosciences about the journey of a revenue operations leader. Welcome, Cam, and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to join and have the discussion. I'm looking forward to it.
Cam, maybe it'd be good to start with a quick background on yourself so we can get some perspective there, and then we'll dig into your journey a little bit.
So I have been in the life sciences industry for a little over a decade now. I started on the finance side in FP&A, supporting the commercial organization. Everything from what you would expect with forecasting, ranging from operating expenses to revenue, QBRs, ad hoc analysis, deep dives into the commercial business and what was going on. Sales operations wasn't even really a formalized function at the organization I was at Illumina 10 years ago. So in many ways, part of what I did as a business partner really had to do with aspects of what you might even expect now out of a high functioning revenue operations group. I also quickly realized that I really enjoyed being part of the commercial organization. And so at the first opportunity I had, I seized the moment to be able to make that transition over and join commercial. And that opportunity was to build out sales operations for the Americas region and take a team of what was maybe 5 and build it out into a broader, highly capable sales operations organization. And it quickly grew to about 16 individuals. And then from there, with the rapid pace of growth that I think we've all experienced in the genomic space, continued to expand. And there was an obvious need to continue to build out the infrastructure and scale to support that commercial growth. And with that, operations functions. And so kind of was moving as we went and added on capabilities and integrated functions, everything from customer service to inside sales, commercial coordination, which is quoting functions and support, all the way through to sales and strategy analysts. And then from there, took a step back and really asked ourselves the question of, how do we set ourselves up for longer term growth from a commercial operations perspective, and reorganized it again into some of the structures that I think we're used to seeing now within a revenue operations function, bringing in service and support operations and channel operations alongside sales operations to call something truly revenue ops, centralizing data and analytics and training and some of these core functions like process excellence and creating those centers of excellence to help support the business and scale. And then from there, took on an opportunity to transition over very recently to Pacific Biosciences, a company at a different stage. And in need of a similar opportunity to build and grow out a commercial operations function from the ground up with support from senior leadership to do so, recognizing the importance of it relative to some of our goals as it relates to aggressive growth and expansion of the commercial organization.
Excellent. Great journey. And so you really started in the shadows of shadow ops, it sounds like we talk about, and saw that progression and really lived it, from building up some of the basic sales ops functions into something more expansive, which you're scaling up today in your new role, which really is where, revenue operations, that whole concept of something bigger to support the revenue engine of the company that spans beyond sales ops, right? I think is a lot of what we're seeing, and sounds like what you're building out and have been focused on over the last few years. What are some of the key evolution or transformation points of that function that you've seen and some of the teams operating within RevOps in your journey?
Yeah, I think what everyone is starting to come to realize is that so much of the buyer's journey is interlinked amongst the various commercial functions. So from marketing to sales to service, you have to be set up to be successful cross-functionally. Your processes, there's very few processes or ways of operating and doing business and supporting customers start and end within a given function. And it's about really kind of pulling a thread from marketing all the way through to service, and everything from demand generation all the way through to training and renewal and support of a customer and driving recurring revenue through utilization. That whole continuum, you have to be thinking about it broadly, and you can't just be siloed. And I think that that's the realization everyone's starting to come to, and why something like commercial operations or revenue operations makes so much more sense versus either having a shadow operations group or having marketing rely on building out its own operational capabilities within marketing and sales within sales, et cetera. or even establishing sales operations and saying that's really all I need. Because if you're only looking at something within that narrow of a lens, then you're really giving up opportunities to drive greater efficiency, to potentially create bottlenecks either upstream or downstream in terms of how information flows. And then on top of that, how we can take advantage of the tremendous amount of information and data that exists across commercial that can be utilized and leveraged multidimensionally across functions and in different manners. But in order to do that, you first need to be able to centralize it to maintain the quality of it, and then enable access to it in the ways that are sort of customized to the end user. And so those are just some of the examples of where everyone's starting to realize that there's so much more that can be done. And I think organizations that recognize that and recognize the value in that create a competitive advantage relative to those that don't, just in terms of how they operate and how that can help to accelerate sales velocity, how it can drive customer experience, and how it can build greater insights into how we can continue to drive things like top of funnel demand gen.
I mean, you mentioned the buyer journey fundamentally has shifted. You mentioned how data is foundational, that you believe all data is commercial data, which I think was something that I took away as an interesting comment, because I think that sort of leads into my next question, which is really about the power of a well-functioning revenue ops team and kind of the impact it can have, and how it's really different from the past. I think you've already talked about how it's tying that data all together, how all data can be commercial data, but what's the power and the impact that's changed because of this shift? Yeah. And how do you see that playing out, as you lead this function going forward? As a leader of that function?
Well, I think another good example of that and the power, if we think about when you structure a commercial operations organization and you think about centers of excellence, data being one of them, which we highlighted, that I think is a tremendous one. But if we think about even commercial technology as a whole, and if you think about commercial technology encompassing not only the data and the analytics and the underlying master data and maintenance, but even the various tools and processes that are inherent within a commercial organization. By having that centralized, it helps you to see the entire picture as it relates to your technology stack, as it relates to how you determine the best ways to invest your money and time and precious headcount resources into enhancements and creating new systematic tools and ways of doing business. Helps you to also identify where maybe there's benefits in a decision that otherwise you wouldn't even consider, and could modify the business case for either putting money in or prioritizing one decision point over another. For example, think about content management and content management systems. If that is something that is purely housed within marketing, are they truly thinking about the value of content management beyond their immediate need, beyond their own management of how they create campaigns and leverage those, about how they create their collateral? Are we really truly thinking about how we can drive greater enablement with the sales organization by access to that content for where they may be in any given instance or opportunity or discussion with a potential customer in driving a sale? And so if you have somebody central to that, then what you're bringing in is all of the potential needs and use cases and value add drivers relative to something like that, so that you can be thinking about not only, well, what's the marketing need here, but is there a benefit from the sales side, and how can we help maximize that as well? And then where does that sit relative to another project that might be more sales oriented, as we think about things like CPQ enhancements and approval hierarchies. And there's only so much time and energy, especially in a small company, to prioritize towards these things. And so when you have a holistic view, it gives you a much better sense for what can help us now, what can help us later, and where do we get the biggest bang for our buck, and constantly be asking ourselves, where can we do cross-functional programs? Because then we get incremental leverage out of the implementations we do, because it's going to benefit more than one of our functions.
So in the past, where we may have been optimizing within a silo of sales or marketing or even service, and thinking about tools or processes or even people to support, right, those organizations, now you're saying we take this broader view, it's more holistic, and we're actually optimizing for a bigger impact, a broader impact. and, playing off, the priorities that we really should have to drive our revenue engine. So I see that as a direct line to revenue impact, which really, I think, helps support this definition that it's revenue operations. You're helping drive revenue in a bigger and better way, and a more efficient way, and a prioritized way going forward. So that makes a lot of sense. How, when you're in this role, coming back a little bit to sort of the personal aspect and the journey, how do you, you mentioned you have a lot of executive support in your new role, but I know in talking to a lot of ops leaders, rev ops, commercial ops, sales ops leaders, that can be a struggle, right? How do you get the right level of executive, C-level, or CEO support? And how do you manage that? How do you build that over time? Anything in your personal journey that you've sort of applied there to make that happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. It's certainly can be a very tall hill to climb to get there, depending on the organization and the company and where they're at, and their relative experience with what commercial operations does. I think in many instances, there's an expectation of, hey, I want things to be this way, and expect them to operate in a certain manner. And it's the role of commercial operations to make that happen. And so it becomes a double-edged sword, because you want things to look as seamless as possible. It's like a duck, right? Like calm on the surface and paddling like crazy below. That's kind of commercial operations in a way. And so you want there to be enough appreciation and recognition for that crazy paddling down below, because of all of the areas that we're supporting and managing, and how deep into the weeds we can get, all the way down to data and account hierarchies and contact segmentation fields and things like that, to enable a very broad picture that helps drive strategic insight. And you don't want to get C-level executives so caught up in those details at all the time that their eyes glaze over and they're like, I don't want to know about any of this. But you want them to have some appreciation for the level of effort that commercial operations teams are going through, because it's, I always kind of view it as like, commercial operations is kind of like a Sherpa going up the mountain to Mount Everest. That's how much they carry, and they can do it, and they can go up and down that mountain 1,000 times to help support the person that's trying to make that journey, to make it seem that much easier, but they're carrying that load. And so as a commercial operations leader, one, it's your responsibility to ensure that there's that appreciation for your team, and that your team also understands the value of the impact they're doing. And then two, picking and choosing when and how to expose the senior leaders to what's really happening underneath. And that's really important for a number of reasons, so that they have an appreciation for what's going on, and so that they also understand, what they're investing in and why it's important to put that in, because it takes more than maybe it might seem. And so you have to decide when. You have to do it selectively, and just enough for them to get it, and then you need to move on from it, as opposed to continue to hammer on it. And the other side of that, I think, just comes with building out the trust and credibility of the organization, and who you are as their partner, and as a strategic advisor, and as an unbiased party relative to the rest of the commercial organization about what is and isn't possible. And that comes with, what I would view as both taking a near-term and long-term approach to driving the value of commercial operations. So when you come in, and if you're trying to establish the organization and establish the capabilities and credibilities, sit down, listen to the various leaders across your functions, listen to the challenges within the organizations that they're facing, and identify some near-term opportunities, the quote, low-hanging fruit, that you can immediately start to deliver on, and set aside time for your organization to focus on those, so that you can start to slowly release these sorts of improvements and enhancements, so that they can see those happening. And in the meantime, also focus on what are the bigger, large scale improvements that I want to make to help set us up for success for the future. And if you can combine those, then you can start to slowly build up that credibility with each one of those enhancements that you improve, and you start to get more and more advocates and supporters. And then that helps you to then have the credibility to take forth something bigger and better, and say, hey, you're going to get return on this, just like you're getting return on all these things. You want to step it up a notch, and you want more, this is what you do. And so you get them to start to really latch onto those small things, and that helps them to see the vision of what could be even next. You want them to start asking, hey, this is great. Could I also get this? And you go, yes, you can.
Can I get
and
more?
Here's what it's going to take.
Build the trust, build the credibility, show them wins, smaller, quick wins, and then lead them down the path of the other things that are going to make bigger impacts over time. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And show just enough of the paddling below the water so that they're appreciative, but don't overexpose is what I'm hearing. Yeah, and with so many more functions coming into play, and you kind of touched on this, the horizontal nature across the sales, marketing, and service, that ops is playing now versus more of that cylindrical or siloed approach. It just underscores even more, I think, these issues that we're talking about the exposure and the prioritization and what should come next. What any sort of big learnings that you've had, over the years in these rev ops and commercial ops and sales ops type roles that you're sort of taking forward as you're continuing to scale, your current organization? Are there a couple things that you're really, focused on from a learning perspective?
Yeah. There's a few. One, certainly the importance of data and quality data, master data management, as an underlying foundation for anything else you want to do, because so much of what we want to do and provide requires having that good, clean, quality data, whether you're enabling greater insight to the sales team, whether it's relative to strategic discussions and annual planning and long-term planning for the broader commercial organization, whether it's market segmentation so that you can build out better sense for your customer base and where you want to focus and put your marketing investment in, and the type of programs you want to invest in, all the way through to the type of products that you want to develop. And what you're hearing from voice of customer, if you don't have good quality data to build that platform off of, then it is the age-old adage of garbage in, garbage out. So that's foundational. And with that, then standing up a really strong backbone with your data warehouse and how you actually make that data available across the teams is another one. So you start with the quality of the data, then you start with how you construct it to make it available. And that can be a tremendous benefit to the organization, and something that I think has evolved over time versus similarly siloed information. And among other things, one of the things that helps guarantee is that you're all speaking the same language. So no matter if you're in marketing or sales or service, you're pulling from the same pool of data. We've ideally identified standardized metrics and measures for key areas like utilization, so that we all use the same definitions or are looking at it in the same way. The other thing that I would say is it's really important when you come in and when you're building out the functions and when you're trying to figure out how to support the organization, you got to spend a good amount of time up front doing the listening and the due diligence around what are the needs within the organization. And don't just come in thinking you know what the organization needs. Make sure you understand what's being done and how they're operating before you make that decision for them. And that could be for anything. And that can be from how we do something versus the tools we use to do it. Because we've all, I think, been in prior roles or prior companies, and we used certain tools, and it's easy to get caught up thinking like, well, that's got to be the way to do it. But the stuff continues to, there's always something new coming out. People are always trying to solve some of the core problems, and that's a really important thing to keep in mind. But beyond that, if you really want to provide value, the first thing you got to do is listen and understand what the immediate needs are, because you may feel like they're different, but you need to start with where others perceive the need is, so that again you can start to establish value and then focus on the other areas. Because I've also found that in a lot of instances, some of the areas that are most critical to us are areas that nobody else really wants to talk about or cares about. Things like master data, like an account hierarchy. How often do you want to actually talk to a marketer or a sales rep about account hierarchy? They don't want to talk about it, and it totally makes sense why they wouldn't want to, but that's so critical to what's going on. But at the same time, you can't just focus on that. You still want to focus on something that they're going to see, that tangible stuff that's going to let them say like, man, comm ops, revenue operations, this is great. Where was this for me, 5 years ago?
One other area that I want to explore a little bit with you, Cam, that I think you probably got some good insight on, and it's kind of around the talent and the competencies that you have within revenue ops or commercial ops. You've mentioned to me in our conversations how it's really important to have a diversity of talent within operations. And I think that's a really interesting comment that stuck with me, because oftentimes I've spoken with leaders who say, the best ops teams are people from finance or from former salespeople, and that's who I target, that's who I bring in. But the more I think about, how we're talking about revenue operations today, that diversity seems really important, that you've got to, bring people in. Plus we have a lot of newer, or say more emerging roles that maybe we didn't have as much of in the past, or didn't have at all, right? I hear about data scientists and people who are facile with technologies and other things that are fitting into that broad set of functions. How do you think about that diversity of talent? What things have you been doing to ensure that? And what are some of the areas that you're looking for, in terms of creating that diversity? Like, what are some of those diverse areas?
Yes. So like we mentioned in the forum, I think the diversity is critical. I think that just given the way that this area continues to evolve and grow, and in certain instances is relatively new, even though it's new, some of the underlying core practices, if you just like peel back the onion a little bit, are very established. But if we think about things like the newer concept, of process excellence as a commercial operations or revenue operations function.
Yep.
Process excellence
seeing
is
that more and more. Yeah.
But it's not something new. It's new within this space. And so you could say kudos to those that have identified this as being something that you can bring in to help broadly impact our commercial organization and the way we do business and interact with our customers. But that is someone that you could tap from an operations function. Someone that has that background, a core background in process, that is rooted in process. You can teach those individuals, if they're the right individuals and you identify the right talent, about, commercial terminology and the commercial way of doing business. But it also never hurts to have that outside perspective of not necessarily knowing exactly how it's always done, so that you don't immediately revert to, well, that's how we've always done it, or that's how I've always known it. And someone can look at it from the outside in and go, why do you do it that way? Because I would just do it this way if I was optimized. And then you have to either explain why, and in the explanation yourself, you might find yourself being like, okay, maybe I don't have to do it this way. You know what I mean? Or it just opens your eyes to that new way of thinking, and that in and of itself can be a revolutionary way of operating. And so that's where you can get some of that outside value. And I think what everyone's starting to recognize is that there's a ton of resources like that out there that you can tap to bring that knowledge in. FP&A resources are fantastic, I think. I'm a former FP&A guy myself, but there's certain
slightly biased there.
that you can provide real value. And if I think about a strategy and operations analyst, then I am going to consider the FP&A pool because of their experience as a business partner, which is really critical. If you're a good FP&A partner, you're a great business partner with your, whether it's commercial or whomever else you've been supporting. If you're a commercial FP&A partner, then you've already understand the terminology, but again, you're coming from outside in and probably have a different point of view that could be valuable. And you've got strong modeling capabilities, forecasting and projection capabilities, and you can bring that to the table. And so that's something that I might want to consider. Now, and there's other areas where, absolutely, I want to think about looking at it from, say, within the sales organization. That's something like training. If I think about sales training, that's an area where I want to think about who in my sales organization has a passion for this sort of thing. Who do I see that's constantly outreaching and volunteering to offer training? To be a part of training, who wants to be like one of our field training champions, and through that you give them opportunity, almost grooming them up for this and saying, hey, do you want to make that switch over? But that's the type of role where you can have a tremendous amount of benefit in bringing someone in from your sales organization. There is still obviously a strong fit for those that have been within some form of commercial operations, marketing ops, sales ops. It's really that broad set of points of view that I think help you get to the best answer. And that for me is something that I think is incredibly important. And as a commercial operations, revenue operations leader, you cover, as you mentioned, so many functions, so many broad functions. you can't be an expert in all of it. And so you need to think about what sort of expertise do I want around me within each of those core capabilities,
Right.
so that I can trust in them to be able to execute. And they understand the responsibilities and expectations and deliverables within their function and what that mission and vision is. And you need to be able to pivot amongst them all. And so you need to have a good sense for it as a generalist, but you want to surround yourself with those specialists within each of your functions that you can really rely on to go and execute towards the strategies that you think are important within each one of those.
Diversity and building a strong bench and management structure beneath you so that you can really cover off on the diversity of functions. It is astounding. I mean, how many different areas you could potentially need to be an expert in if you wanted to be the master of everything, right? And that's pretty impossible, especially as you grow and certainly in bigger companies where you've got all kinds of products and business units and everything going on at the same time. So no, great advice there. And I think with that, Cam, we've had a great conversation here today, and I really want to thank you for taking the time to chat with me a little bit about revenue ops, your journey, your experience, some of the priorities that you're placing. I think this is helpful, and I think people will value your input. And I look forward to having you back at some point here on Spotlight Revenue Operations on a later episode to hear about your progress and successes. So stay tuned for further episodes here on Spotlight Revenue Ops. If you'd like to learn more or read more about revenue operations, visit the Alexander Group, and we've got lots of resources there for you. And I want to thank you again, Cam, and thanks everyone for watching and listening today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Take care.